Hi, welcome to the first 2026 edition of Qualex Live. I'm Gary Jackson, VP here at Qualex, and man, I always seem to be recording these from a location on the road, always a hotel bed behind me. Apologize for that, but as we step into a new year, at Qualex, travel casinos are some of our biggest customers. So I wanted to focus on the issues that they face. And for travel nations, the digital frontier isn't just about efficiency. It's about protecting the new land, which is data. So the intersection of ancient sovereignty and future technology has never been more critical. So in today's episode, we're going to dive deep into travel casinos who are navigating the rapid rise of AI and AI agents and why data sovereignty is the cornerstone of self-determination in the 2020s. We'll explore how autonomous systems can transform guest experiences and operational margins while ensuring that travel data stays under tribal control. In this episode, some of the other things that we're going to be talking about is data as sovereignty. Why where your data lives is the most important legal battle and political question for travel enterprises in 2026. And we'll also be balancing tradition with innovation. How the Cherokee, the Choctaw Nation, and others are using AI not just for profit, but for cultural and language preservation. And we have a lot more we'll be discussing. But let's get started with our first amazing guest, Valerie Redhorse Mole.
Hi, this is Gary Jackson, Vice President of Qualex. And by the way, it is an honor to introduce our guest today, Valerie Redhorse Mole. By the way, I've been looking forward to this, talking to her all week. And Valerie is a trailblazing leader at the intersection of finance, education, and film. As the CEO and founder of Redhorse Financial Group, she has dedicated over 30 years to the financial services and investment banking industry. A pioneer in tribal finance, she has raised and structured over $3 billion in capital for Native American tribal nations, providing essential financial solutions for economic development and social justice. The other thing that I'm so excited about with what she's done is about her expertise and impact and equity extends into the classroom at Stanford University, where she serves as a lecturer and advisory board chair for the Center for the Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. At Stanford, she teaches the undergraduate courses on entrepreneurship for social impact and racial equity, mentoring the next generation of leaders to use basically as a business tool to change the world as we know it. And in addition to her financial and academic leadership, Valerie is the founder of the Red Horse Native Productions, Inc., which we're going to be talking about. As an award-winning filmmaker, director, and producer, she has created over a dozen projects, including the critically acclaimed PBS documentary Man Killer, that basically, if you haven't seen it, you need to see it. Focuses on bringing accurate and dignified Native American stories to global audiences. By the way, Valerie, it's an honor to have you. I know that was a long intro, but you've done so much.
Oh, Gary, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. And I think it's just because I'm so old. I've been around a long time, which has allowed me to be blessed with a lot of different activities. But thank you. I'm happy to be here and look forward to our conversation.
And by the way, so you're out of New York now. I know that my understanding is you kind of go back and forth between West Coast and East Coast. You're in New York City now. Is that correct?
I am in New York City this morning. I have a full-time job in New York City managing money for the city pension funds. But my heart will always be in California. My husband's there and most of my children. And I have the Stanford background behind me. So I do tend to go back and forth quite a bit. Look, I love both cities. It's great to be bi-coastal, but California would win if I had to say which one was my favorite.
You know, it's funny. That's exactly where I was going to go. I was going to create a little rivalry here and ask you which side did you like. And so, I mean, you get your New York big city vibes, and then you could go back to California and kind of enjoy, okay, big sky kind of thing, correct?
Yeah, and I think as a Native American, I really enjoy nature. I like the ocean. I like big spaces of greenery and trees. And You don't see that in Manhattan. In Manhattan, I live in the financial district next to the New York Stock Exchange. I don't even see a weed down here. So it's great for
You see a
restaurants.
lot of rats. You see a lot of rats.
Yes, there's some downside.
Yeah.
But in general, I love the energy of New York. I love the financial center of the world, basically. But give me California beaches anytime, and I'll be there.
Got it. I'd love to know your history. I know we know all the things you've done and what you're doing, but how did you get to this place? I mean, I know you have to go back, but what brought you to where you are right now, if you don't mind me asking? Or what?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's a great question, because there's been times when I've looked back and thought the same thing. Well, what brought me here? But in all honesty, it was the initial influence of my parents. And so my father was full-blood Cherokee Indian. He had been born in Tahlequah before Oklahoma was even a state. He was very old when he had me. And he was brought out, if you watch the Man Killer film, the interesting thing is my father was brought out on the same relocation program as Wilma Man Killer into San Francisco from Oklahoma.
Wow.
So he landed in San Francisco and got a job, and ended up through that job meeting my mother, who is 100% English. She had no idea, she didn't know anything about Native Americans, but they fell in love. They had me. And what they shared in common, they were both activists. So my father was an activist for Native American rights, worked a lot with California tribes once he ended up in California. In fact, he led the movement to get the Bureau of Indian Affairs out of the Department of War and into the department it's in now. Which is the Department of Interior. So it was a while back, but an important move, obviously. And then my mother was a food activist. She believed in whole foods, organic foods, no pesticides, gluten-free, vegan. She's now passed
way ahead of her time, by the way. Way ahead of her time.
So far ahead of her time. People thought I was nuts. I would come to school sometimes with lunches that were just had bean sprouts and gluten-free bread, and I don't even know where she got it back then. But point being, they both taught me whatever the issue, didn't matter. I was to be engaged in the community around me. I was to make a difference. My mom did protest marches and passed out flyers for, whatever her thing was. My dad, led these initiatives to make changes for Native Americans. And so I was about 13 when I decided film would be my voice. I felt that film could really change people, grab their emotions. I saw a film back then called Scared Straight, and it was a focus on the drug and alcohol situation with youth. And I'm telling you, it changed people's minds. It was very powerful. And so it just made me want to go into film. And so I did. I chose UCLA Film School and Theater Department, and that was my whole plan. But while I was at school at UCLA, I was on scholarship and I needed some extra spending money. And I saw literally a small card on a job board in the theater and film department that said, we're hiring for an office admin. And I went and applied, and I got the job on the spot. And the man said to me, we're bringing out the high yield leverage bond finance department. I remember going back to my roommate and saying, I don't even know what that is, but I'm working for him. And his name was Michael Milken. So,
wow.
Needless to say, working, and I think I was the third hire into the Beverly Hills office. This was in 1978. And I worked there for about 8 years. And I say I got an MBA. I learned everything you possibly could. We were the #1 investment bank in the world at the time. We financed so many different things. We structured debt with equity. And I learned all about finance, and I got excited about having a voice in finance and access to capital. I did not meet one other Native American the entire time I was there. I met one African American person. And Mike himself is very progressive and very liberal and really open to diversity. But it just was the markets at the time were very close to women and people of color. And that's really what led me to start the first Native American owned investment bank and try to bring that type of knowledge to our communities. And it ended up coming in handy with gaming finance, but I'm sure we can get into that a bit later.
That's what the other question I was going to have is not just meeting people of diverse backgrounds, but females. Women. How many women did you meet when you were coming up, or did you find yourself being the only woman in the room?
No, what was so interesting, there were a handful of women at Drexel at the time, but most of the trajectory that was so interesting to me, the people who were women when I started were all admin. They're all secretaries. They called us secretaries at the time. And Mike elevated every single one of them because he grew so fast. He needed anyone in his office. I mean, you could have been the janitor in all honesty. And if you wanted to take the test and learn, he elevated you. So it was that mobility. And there's a woman I'll never forget who I'm close to now named Lorraine Spurgeon. She came in as an assistant and then she ended up running the department. She became very, very well thought of in the finance industry. And she now helps Mike run his, the Milken Institute, which is a nonprofit. But point being, the women I saw were not naturally getting access to capital or naturally heading companies. It was all about internal mobility with Mike because there just were not very many women in the industry at the time.
And by the way, then the next thing, not only being able to kind of blaze a trail into this, how hard was it to bring capital together for tribes or for tribal casinos? How did that come about?
So it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was so necessary because, what I teach in my class at Stanford, which is entrepreneurialism, is you find the gap, right? Where is there a gap in the business or in the markets? And then how can I fill that gap? And I looked at the first bond deal ever done for a tribal casino. It was for Mohegan. And I think it was in 94 and it was led by Bear Stearns and it was 17% interest rate with all kinds of horrible covenants. But it was 17% for everything they were doing. And my knowledge of how Mike worked and then also adding the government factor in for a tribal government, I realized you could take that and maybe pay 17% for the gaming floor. But for other things, you could do muni bonds and you could do government financing and you could do an SBA backed loan for the infrastructure. And so that's what I started doing. I started putting together these deals similar to what I had learned at Milken is like, what does integrated capital look like to get the best deal for the client? And I would often get that, what would have been all in 17% down to something like 7 or 8% when you blend it. But it was a lot of work because if you're doing an SBA or BIA guaranteed loan side by side with a muni bond with traditional commercial gaming from a hedge fund out of New York, it gets to be a little crazy in terms of it takes longer to close and a lot more work to get everyone to work together, but it was well worth it.
Wow. And so this might be just something that I think was it hard to get people to believe in the idea, the vision for it? Like, why would they not? Yeah, I guess the question you always got, why should I do this when I could go to Vegas or go to another gaming location?
So what's interesting about the markets, a lot of people have said to me, do you see a lot of racism and sexism in the markets? In some ways, yes, but I would say the markets are green. And the bottom line is they look for money and opportunity. And you could be a Martian with polka dots on your skin. If you had the opportunity that the markets saw an opportunity in terms of making money. And gaming is always something that has very large cash flow margins. It makes a lot of sense, but there usually is a licensing exclusivity situation. And so, you were kind of constrained back then to Las Vegas and Atlantic City. And so suddenly the investors saw the possibility of, wow, we could have an exclusive market. If you think of Mohegan and Pequots and Seminoles, and the ones down in Palm Springs, like Pechanga, they have exclusivity in their market and they pay no income tax. And so suddenly the markets went, here is an opportunity to really get some interesting leverage with the bonds and then make some money on the high yield side, but also be able to have a very secure underlying asset. And so even though there was still questions about sovereign immunity and who we are as tribal nations, the industry really exploded because of the gaming opportunities. And it played out, after Mohegan, we saw, originally it was hard to get the startup capital for some of these enterprises, but once they started cash flowing, the markets were coming to us. And when I did a couple of my deals, I ran RFPs for my partner on the market between like Merrill Lynch and B of A and Credit Suisse and Lehman Brothers. I mean, folks that are no longer in business, unfortunately. But bottom line, they all wanted to do the work. So it became a very mature market. However, Gary, what I found disappointing is if we then went to market with, oh, the tribe now wants to expand and run a retail operation, or they want to, open something that has impact, a childcare center or workforce training, then no one was interested. And we had to go to other methods of finance because it wasn't the same sort of margins. And it was clear that the industry was really only interested in gaming for a while.
Well, that was going to be where I was going to ask next. Just as an aside, how did you kind of land on casinos? Was there ever any other opportunities or something you looked into, but gaming was just probably the most lucrative? I guess that.
Yeah. So when I started my investment bank, it was 1997.
Yeah.
Gaming was in its growth phase. Tribal gaming was in its growth phase. And during the time that I worked with tribes on building their casinos and financing their casinos, we overtook Las Vegas in terms of overall, like we're 32 billion.
Wow.
Las Vegas is at 27 billion or something. But being we were in a growth phase, and so most of the tribes who came to me, and I was very present in the community, so most of my clients came to me from word of mouth. They wanted help with their gaming casino. That was their number one revenue generator, so that made sense for them. But I always preach diversification because, as you and I know, you cannot depend on gaming. There's regulatory changes. There's all kinds of threats to gaming. And now I think more than ever, we see the online threat and prediction markets and all of that. Yeah. But what happened is slowly over time, as I would help a tribe build their casino or refinance it, then they'd come to me and say, can we, finance something else? And what I would say was the number one, and I still think is the number one other industry that we should be looking at as tribes that can actually, in my opinion, surpass gaming is renewable energy. There are benefits to us building renewable energy at utility scale with the data centers and AI coming online. We should not ignore the opportunity. We can access capital through the Department of Energy that's lower than commercial capital. So that gets me excited because I do think that's the next generation of gaming, like, an industry that will provide those types of revenue and benefits to tribes.
And one of the things that this leads into my question, it's kind of a not a loaded question, but it's sovereignty. So here's the tribes have their sovereignty. They are their own nations. So how did you, first of all, not kind of and feel free to correct me as I say this, not link any of your revenues and stuff to the nation that surrounds a tribe? How do you keep its sovereignty? And then we're going to later talk about, with the renewable energy piece, how can you as a sovereign nation also get that energy outside to other nations that need that energy, not just the ones that surround you or the U.S. that surrounds you?
So let me take your first question.
Yeah, please.
So sovereignty is sacred. And I remember once talking to a tribal leader that I worked with, and he said, I gave a speech once and they said to me, what are the three most important things to tribal nations? And he said, sovereignty, sovereignty, sovereignty. So it is bottom line. We never want to do anything that depreciates our sovereignty, and we want to exercise our sovereignty in the maximum way. And so what happened in tribal finance is you obviously had all these big finance entities as lenders coming in, and they had their templates for here is our bond agreement or a loan agreement, whatever it was. And it was usually based with an adjudication in New York City. And so the tribe knew if they wanted that money, and we're talking hundreds of millions and billions, not just a small loan, that they would have to agree to that adjudication in New York City. So you're going to do what's called a limited waiver of sovereign immunity. And that would include agreeing to something outside of your court system, but also waiving your immunity. But what I was helpful with, and we had attorneys as well, was keeping that waiver as narrow in scope as possible, meaning it was limited to that 200 million they were lending us for the casino, meaning you could not touch our Child Welfare Act money or our, something else that we had for education or our hospital system. So we made it extremely narrow, limited to the gaming authority, and the market accepted it after a while. And there were some very smart attorneys that we worked with around the country, non-Indian attorneys sometimes specialized in tribal finance, like Oric as an example was one of those firms that we used a lot to help us. And we got it to the point where the tribes realized if they could limit that to a very narrow scope, they were actually exercising their sovereignty to access this capital and then grow their resources, and those other resources were protected.
Wow. And so well, let me just get into. I want to keep the sovereignty conversation going because now you've got technologies, and there's a lot of technology, especially around AI, that it doesn't pierce your sovereignty, but there is a dependence on data centers that are outside your nation, also data that goes outside your nation. How do you see the AI adoption in tribal sovereignty? How does that play in? Yeah.
It's a great question. I'm very much involved with it. I would say there's one word that's key, and that's partnerships. So I actually did a deal with a large tribal nation, and Microsoft was one of our partners. And I will tell you that the hyperscalers, the Mag 7, can be very good partners. And we were actually working on a renewable energy deal, and Microsoft was the counterparty, which meant from a credit standpoint, as the investment bank, I had no problem because their credit's better, I think, than the US credit. And they were purchasing the eventual power and product. And so that also helped us from a power purchase agreement. But they honored the sovereignty of the tribe, and the money, they made an investment into the tribal project and asked me the same question you just asked me. How do we do it in a way where we know we can have some recourse if something happens, but we don't want to have it any broader? And so we again did the limited waiver of sovereign immunity. But I think in the broader question that you actually asked me, there's a need for renewable energy power. It has to include battery storage. Look, data centers are not going away. They're going to be built. They're going to continue to be built. And I think the broader answer is tribes need to get involved. Not only can they access lower cost of capital and they can enter into these partnerships, but then they can control how these are constructed, who we're using to build them, and then how we're treating the community, making sure we're not poisoning the water around us, the ecosystem is preserved. Because I think one of the largest problems with the speed at which the industry of AI is progressing, we have to think about critical mineral mining. We have to think about data centers in terms of their entire footprint. And tribes do that when they are a partner. And what I found so interesting, using Microsoft as the example, Microsoft listened. They were extremely good partners. And I've heard the same about Meta and some of the others, that if a tribe's involved, they really do listen to them in terms of how we do this. And let's do it in a good way. And by the way, Gary, you know, I'm Cherokee. We have a word in Cherokee, Gadugi, and it means doing things in a good way for people and planet and the community. And I think if we approach these partnerships with that Gadugi mentality, it really works better for everyone. You don't want to see these data centers go up and everything happen without any input from our indigenous communities. It just doesn't work.
One of the things I've gotten in trouble for often when I was teaching at the university and those type of things is kind of complaining that a lot of our AI issues that we're facing, of course, there's an energy issue, I get that, but the data bias is really kind of driven by old, straight, white man data. And I was always very specific, old, straight, white, American man data. With that being said, you know, your language, your culture, how is that? Have you had any conversations around bringing in the Cherokee language for AI, or is it happening? How do we make this culturally relevant, right?
Well, I think now you've hit on something that is a much longer issue to discuss, but we're looking at future generations, and you're absolutely right. I do think the answer to this initially lies with our research centers like at Stanford, and IAIA is doing some work on this. We did a project at Stanford called Race and Tech, and I'll just give you a really small example, but it's indicative of a larger problem. They put into Google, and by the way, Google was launched by two people that went to Stanford, so this is very close to home. They put into the Google search, show us a picture of a nice male haircut. 7 images of white males, very clean cut, came up. And then they put in, show us an image of a bad male haircut, and immediately African-American afros with black men. Completely biased, right? And that's a very small example, but imagine if everything we do is skewed to think that one demographic is good and the others are bad, or whatever the narrative is. And so what it means is we have to be involved. And I'm happy to say that Stanford has one of the most robust Native American studies program. We have a lot of Native students. We are doing things, and it's not me, I teach one class, but they're doing things in Cherokee language and Lakota language and Navajo language, but we cannot let up because it's a huge issue. And I go back to the word partnerships. We know who's driving the AI race. If you look at your portfolio, it's easy to see who the Mag 7 are. But what's nice is that in Silicon Valley, Stanford has a relationship with many of these companies, as well as other research institutions. And so I think as Native Americans, we have to focus on education. We have to focus on getting our next generation involved, because it really is a young man's sport. And I mean, woman too.
And women too.
Yeah, but when you're talking about coding AI, you're usually not talking about baby boomers who are 65 or over. You're usually talking about that under 30 crowd.
Yes.
And so I do think it's important that our tribal nations really have a focus on education and supporting their members into the schools where they can be effective and learn about how they can stay involved with AI.
Well, if we start local too, let's say a tribal casino is trying to inspire or recruit from its nation. How can a tribal casino do that? How can we inspire the next generation locally? Yeah, there's the Stanford and the big schools, but doing things locally to bring those up. Any ideas there?
Absolutely. I mean, there is the network of the 17 tribal colleges like Haskell and some of the others that I support. And those are very local in rural places, and they're not in the big coastal places typically. But I also think we have to build our internal governance capacities. Many tribes are doing a great job, but I think we're still in a growth phase in terms of how our tribal politics work. They need to be functional. They need to be improving the local economy so that we can attract our youth to come back if they go away to school, coming back and working in government. I don't so much support them wanting to necessarily work at the casino. Those are typically jobs that help the local economy, but I'd rather see a young Native person go away to school and come back and become a tribal leader than a blackjack dealer. So I really want to see our future generations of Native Americans understand leadership, understand partnerships, which I've mentioned many times, and be able to improve their community. Because what happens when we see these improvements in communities, and there's a couple of tribes that are doing really, really well. My own Cherokee tribe, great economic development in Oklahoma, outside of their casinos even. I think they're the number 1 employer at this point, and then the government is like number 2. The Chumash tribe in Southern California doing some amazing things. Pechanga, my niece is a member. You could go through the list, and I think all the tribes have to look at those tribes that are doing really important things as role models. How do we diversify? How do we not depend on gaming as our sole source of income? Very important to get to where we need to be.
And I actually love your idea about renewable energy. I think that's going to be a huge opportunity for you too. And I mean, we've just talked about AI, but then there's quantum computing that's on its way, and that's going to be also an opportunity, I think, for the tribes. But I do want to transition a little bit because I get excited about this. I'm excited about AI and technology and making money. But the other thing I'm most excited about too is your form of activist. I wouldn't say revolution, but being active in the community to fight wrongs and put lights on it. It's film. You really focus on film from that perspective. And one of the things I was going to ask is, you grew up in a family that were activists, and things are going on now. Not going to go on those tangents. But what do you see as the difference between activism when your parents were alive and now? And how can we bridge that? Because it feels like there's no collective activism, or maybe I'm not seeing the 1969 version of the U.S., and we need that kind of now. What is your take on that?
Well, I do love the 1969 version. As you know, in my film Man Killer, we have a whole section on the takeover of Alcatraz during that time. And what I loved about it, it was a peaceful protest, but it actually was effective. And Nixon in that administration, which is an odd, I would have missed that on Jeopardy at one point, but it was under the Nixon administration where many tribes got their land back and water rights back. And so it was effective. I don't have all the answers to how we get back to that, but what I will say is I think we have to ignore the noise of short-term administrations. A lot of people are focused on being very disappointed with some things that are happening. And that's actually true for both Trump and Biden, I would say. And as Native people, we have to think long-term. A 4-year term or even an 8-year term should not put us in so much concern that we think about the 7 generations. And so what I've tried to do with my films, which by the way are all bipartisan, we don't take any political viewpoint. We try to raise issues that are important for people to understand about our Native community, our Native contributions, and then what can we learn from that? And so as an example, in the Man Killer film, we had an impact campaign. So we elevate this amazing Native American leader who made a ton of improvements to her nation as well as globally. And then we encouraged other women to think about running for office based on her as a role model. And so that was part of our impact campaign. And we did similar things when we did the Navajo Code Talker film. But honestly, the way that I try to use my films is to raise awareness in a very compelling story. But then what's even more important is the dialogue afterwards. What is the impact campaign? What are we hoping people will go out and do after watching our film? Whether it's run for office or do something that makes a difference, get involved with a boots on the ground nonprofit or NGO. And really that's where I see the most impact.
And by the way, too, I mean, you must be very proud to bring this storytelling legacy. I mean, it was not just you, it was your ancestors before you, but now you're putting it to film. I mean, what brought you into film? I mean, that's a whole nother level of being you. How did you get into film?
Well, I think I told you the story of when I was young and I saw the film Scared Straight. Set me on the idea that I wanted to be involved with film, but I didn't know how or what. I was very young. Right. And what really changed the trajectory of my life was a chance meeting with Senator Daniel Inouye. He's now passed away, but he was from Hawaii. He was the Democratic rep, and he headed up the Indian Affairs Committee at the time in Congress and the Senate. And he approached me and he knew that I had both film and finance in my background. And this was before I had started either of my companies. And my dream at the time, given that I had all of this knowledge, was that I would go work for a big studio or work for a big investment bank, right? That's what you did. And he came up to me and he was a very nice man, but he was very stern with me. And he said, no group of people, no community has ever survived and thrived if they don't control their own finances and their own voice in the media. And he says, you have both in your background. Please don't go work for companies, start your own business and serve your community of Native people. And I remember going home and talking to my husband, and we both agreed we're entrepreneurs. Let's go for it. So that's when I launched my own production company and my own investment bank. And it wasn't easy, but he was absolutely right that that is the way to be able to have more impact rather than just working for the man, so to speak, working for some big company. And I've tried to honor that commitment of trying to work for my community, within my community, and making a difference through the work that I do.
You know, what's funny is a lot of people think that finance and film are totally separate, but what I've always realized, I went to film school in Cape Town, South Africa. The first thing they teach us is it is a financial construct. I mean, the goal is you've got to get, it's probably one of the fastest things. If you do it right and you really magic comes together, it can generate revenue unlike a stock, and you can make it within, 24 months, 18 months after creation of something. So I love that you have both these sides to be able to come together, because as we both know, everyone has a story idea. Everyone has a movie idea. Everyone has a documentary one to do, but none of them happen without finance. And
well, that's true, Gary. And I would say, but kind of going back to impact, the other element that I think is ingrained in me and something I think about every day, if you think about what changes people, what has the ability to create change, raise social awareness, and actually have some long-term effects, there's almost nothing more important than media and finance, because it drives so much power. And as we shift capital, I see huge differences in our economy and our communities, and capital really drives so much. But then our voices in the media, there's never been an inflection time, I think, where the voices in the media are more important than right now. And there's a lot of false narratives, right? And so accurate narratives are so important. And I just think that there are two industries, for whatever reason, God put me in the middle of them. They're two of the most complex, complicated, and challenging industries, and yet they make such a difference in our everyday lives.
And by the way, you're working on something now, a brand new project. I wanted you to kind of talk about that project. So you've done all these in the past, but there's one that really is near and dear to your heart. I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So I was recruited by the executive producer to direct a documentary film called Stolen Sisters. It's on the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls crisis, which is very tragic and very concerning. I said no twice, only because not only is it time consuming, it's a very dark and depressing topic. And I was hoping to do something around food and wine, or I don't know, something a little more joyful. But as I did some of the research, I realized this is an urgent crisis. We need to draw attention to it. We need to find solutions. Basically, we have over 6,000 cases, open cases of Indigenous women that have been raped, murdered, or missing. And a lot of law enforcement ignore it. A lot of the women are indigent, or they may be prostitutes, or they may be drug addicts, but that certainly does not mean that their lives are not valuable, but they are ignored or just not investigated. And it's reached levels where our community just won't stand for it anymore. There have been protests, there have been marches. We're fortunate in that we started the filming process in Michigan, where the governor of Michigan is very sympathetic and has actually a department focused on this. We're trying to work with tribes, we're trying to work with universities, we're trying to work with healthcare organizations and law enforcement. And the point being is that we cannot ignore this anymore. We cannot be silent anymore, but we have to find solutions. And so that's why I'm focused on making the documentary film and the impact campaign that goes with it.
And where are you in the process right now? Are you still looking for financing, or are you still filming? Where are you in the process?
We are looking for financing. It's a very tough financing climate for documentary films. We're a nonprofit, so anyone who wants to make a donation does get a write-off. I'm happy to talk to anyone, offline about it, but we're raising money, and we're also doing a lot of educational seminars, and we're reaching out to many tribes and communities, just gathering the story content. So we're in the early phases of development.
If you have a website or something, I'll put that at the end of this, so we can actually kind of direct or give them some kind of contact play a hub they can get to.
And we do, and thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries. And last thing I wanted to do before we wrap this up is, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to bring this up or not bring it up, but you're also, you haven't stopped creating and helping tribal casinos come into being. You're working on a tribal casino now that's in California. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, we can mention this. So I've been working with the Big Lagoon tribe for many, many years. They went through a horrible lawsuit from the state saying you can't build a casino on your ancestral land. It's too close to the ocean. And it took 10 years, but obviously that was not an accurate, lawsuit. There was no merit to it. So the tribe won. It is their land, and it's a beautiful location in Northern California near Eureka. The problem is it's a smaller casino, and all of the big casinos that can be built have pretty much been built in Indian country. So it's one of the last ones with an active compact that could be built tomorrow, but we are seeking financing for that. And so I'm also looking for any partners. We're open to management and vendors and anyone that wants to work with the tribe. It's a fantastic opportunity.
And by the way, what do you do for fun? I mean, you're constantly working, doing these things. What do you do when you want to toggle off? What is your toggle off?
So there's a couple of things. I am a very strong Christian woman. I teach Bible study on Wednesday nights, and I really do love interacting with that community. But my number one thing is my family. I have an incredible husband. Anyone who knows us says, oh, well, Val's the serious one and Kurt's the fun one. He's a former Oakland Raider, NFL football player.
Oh, okay.
He is gregarious.
I won't hold that against him. I'm a Broncos fan. I won't hold it against him.
But anyway. We do like the Broncos. They've got the quarterback from the former Pac-12.
Yeah. Well, actually, let me just be. I'm an Auburn fan. We suck so bad. He was for the SEC, but we were losers, and then he went to the Pac. But anyway, go ahead. I digress.
Also at Elway for many, many years, who was a Stanford grad. So I'm very much into football. We love to watch sports. That's part of my fun. And being married to a former NFL player, and then all of our kids were athletes. My youngest daughter played beach volleyball for Stanford. That's what I have behind me. That's the beach volleyball court at Stanford. So really, I golf with my husband. He's much better than I am. So I love to golf. I love to be outdoors. I love the ocean. And I love to be with my children. And one of my oldest daughter is pregnant with her second child. And so we're starting to be grandparents. They're little babies right now, but I have a joyful life between what I do for work and how I have my rest and rejuvenation with my family. And I couldn't be more blessed. I thank God every day.
Awesome. By the way, Valerie, I cannot thank you for the time you've taken for today. I know there's so many other subjects, and I'd like to go deeper dives on some of this stuff, but just getting people excited about where things are going to go. Optimism, I think, also is so needed now about where things are going, and I love your optimism. I also love that you know what? Hey, always fight, always be active, always try to change the world. So thank you so much for being on the broadcast.
Well, thank you, Gary. I love the work that you do, and I hope we can stay in touch. And if anyone wants to reach me, I will give you the contact info. And I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation and this relationship.
Awesome. Talk to you soon. Thank you, Valerie.
Awesome. I love that interview, by the way. That was a great interview. Thank you, Valerie, for reminding us that capital is only as good as the values behind it. And as we look at the next frontier of tribal development, technology, specifically AI, it's no longer optional. It's an engine. And to help us navigate the technical how-to while keeping data securely front and center, we have Tom Plunkett. Tom is a leading voice in the practical application of AI, bridging that gap between hype and highly secure. He's about to dive into the infrastructure of AI agents and how Oracle is helping tribes leverage the cloud, and also just talk about how he got his start. So let's throw it to Tom and see what he's up to. Welcome to Qualex Live. I'm your host, Gary Jackson. And let me just say, our guest today is Tom Plunkett. He's from Huntsville, Alabama, based. He's part of the emerging technologies expert at Oracle. And what I'm most excited about is his background. Tom occupies a unique place in the tech world, blending deep technical knowledge with legal and industry expertise. At Oracle, he's a primary lead in helping tribal casinos and gaming enterprises navigate the rapidly shifting landscape of technology. His work focuses on kind of bringing AI and generative AI and cutting-edge solutions together to protect tribal data, enhance operational efficiency in a digital world. And beyond his work here in the gaming sector, Tom is also a leading voice of quantum computing and blockchain. He's a prolific author and technical editor of several books, including the Oracle Big Data Handbook and the Oracle Exalogic Elastic Cloud Handbook. What sets Tom apart is his huge background. He's a patent attorney admitted to the Virginia and patent bars, has represented major clients on patent applications related to AI and emerging tech. He has also shared his expertise as a computer science instructor for Virginia Tech. So all of this stuff coming together, he holds a Juris Doctor from George Mason University, a Master's in Computer Science from Virginia Tech, and a Master's in Blockchain and Digital Currency from the University of Nicosia. He has also completed advanced graduate coursework at Stanford, the University of Colorado Boulder, and cybersecurity and AI. Man, Tom, what have you not done? So please join me in welcoming a true polymath of the tech industry, Tom Plunkett. Welcome, Tom. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Gary. I really appreciate that warm welcome. And I've had a lot of fun. And, I try and do new stuff to have even more fun. So, as you mentioned, my career has covered a wide variety of computer science topics, blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and so on, going back decades. And I've also filed patents because I usually focus in on the emerging tech area. And so I've both represented Oracle and Xerox PARC and other clients in filing patents, as well as, working on my own innovations. So I've had a lot of fun.
By the way, I know we've got some questions already kind of set up that we were going to ask, but how did you, when you were little, when did you know you were going to get into this? What was the thing that sparked your interest as talk about teenage or little Tom Plunkett? What got you inspired?
So that's a really interesting question. I would say that to a certain extent, there's lots of answers to that question. because
It's a true
we just
answer.
talked about half a dozen different topics,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
So
exactly.
each
Yeah,
one of those topics has its own little answer.
right.
Um, Now that being said, the big answer would be,
The one thing that just really kind of like I'm interested in this. I want to go down this technology path.
yeah, so probably in eighth grade,
Uh huh.
um, school got an Apple II computer,
Yep.
and I wrote my first computer program on the Apple II.
Basic. You were
And
writing basic, I guess. I would assume.
yeah, basic, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so back in those days, we didn't have disk drives.
Right.
So we actually, you only had the program alive for as long as the computer was turned on. So,
Exactly. I remember those.
so, so we typed it in from like the back of a magazine, and it was like
Yep.
a lemonade
Family
stand, hello
Computing. I
world
used to
program.
read Family Computing magazine. That was my
Yeah.
magazine. Go ahead. Hmm.
And but that was just typing it in and making it work. That
Right.
that showed that you could type it the way it was written.
Sure.
So then my first real program that I wrote all on my own was modifying that one and creating a random number generator, or a pseudo random number generator, which we'll be talking about a little bit later today
Yeah, a little bit
in this
later.
conversation.
Yeah.
So it was just a pseudo number random number generation, random number generator, because we had to use something similar to that for the lemonade stand program. So I kind of dissected all the lemonade stand stuff out and just kept the randomness.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
that's when I first started getting in deeper into computers.
Wow, that's great. And I guess after that progressed that you probably went home, said, "Mom and Dad, I need a home computer." Then you got a home computer, and then off to the races you went. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
couple years actually. I think it was when I was a junior in high school. We got a VIC 20.
Oh yeah. So I was an Atari guy. So there's Vic and Commodore. By the way, for all you youngsters out there, back in the day it was a Commodore versus Atari back in the day. Not video games, but actually home computers. The Atari. Yeah. Anyway, we could go all in on that, but. My friends were all Commodore people, and I was the only Atari guy. So, but Amiga is still good. So if you ever look at Amigas, they're still crushing it right now. So there you go. So the next question I have is, how did you get involved with tribal casinos? Here we are. I kind of feel like, as I'm not a Native American, I don't feel like I'm obliged to speak of it or speak to it. How did you get involved in the tribal casinos pieces?
So, that's a really interesting question, and part of it's relatively recently. Now, I mean, obviously,
Okay.
travel casinos are relatively recent, but
Right.
um, I've gotten involved with a lot of aspects of gaming from what I've been doing with blockchain technology, because there's a lot of overlap between blockchain and the new currency paradigms related to blockchain
Right.
and the crowds that are looking at gaming. And obviously, as you've seen in the US, we've seen a general liberalization of professional gaming or gambling over the last few years.
Yeah.
You can't flip a channel without seeing a sports gambling ad and so on. So we're
Right.
seeing a lot of, and there's so many lotteries across all the different states. And of course, there's so many tribal casinos
Yeah.
across the US.
Wow.
And so I've gotten more involved with it, just as part of the general liberalization of regulations and laws regarding gambling in general. And obviously, tribal gambling is a subset of the casino space, but it's a
Yeah.
very interesting and vibrant space, and it's really growing quite a bit across the U.S. Dramatically over the past few years. Last year, I was at the Tribal Gaming Association conference, the Indian Gaming Association conference in San Diego. Really
Yeah.
fantastic conference, organized by Victor Rocha
Yeah.
and the
And
Indian
I think
Gaming.
we'll be there together this year. You and I, is
Yeah,
that
looking
correct?
forward
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
And so, being exposed to all these different people and their stories about how they're building their organizations, it's really quite inspiring. And I highly recommend the Indian Gaming Association trade show for anyone who has the time and availability to attend.
Yeah, and of course, San Diego is such a great place to go visit. Who wouldn't want to go to San Diego, especially during that time of the year? I think it's March, into March kind of time frame. But you also work at Oracle. I mean, that's kind of like what kind of drove a lot of this. And I guess to kind of dive into it a little bit, Oracle always kind of emphasizes data sovereignty. For tribal nations, this is more than just kind of a technical term. It's a legal, cultural necessity. How are like modern cloud and AI architectures evolving to ensure tribes can maintain absolute ownership and control over their gaming and their citizen data? How would that work?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, this whole concept of data sovereignty.
Yeah,
Um, so why don't I talk for a minute about Oracle, and then I'll drive into the topic in
please.
general.
Yeah, yeah.
So what I would say is, if you think about Oracle as a company, we offer a variety of different enterprise software products. We're famous for our database. We
Mm-hmm.
also offer applications for HR data, all sorts of different types of data, customer relationship management data, and so on. We also offer a cloud, so you don't have to run those applications and databases in your own data center. You can run them in the cloud. Um, and so on. So we approach data sovereignty from a perspective of making sure that the customer's data is always secure and they have control over it, whether they have that data in their own data center or they put their data somewhere else. We
Yeah.
want to make sure that they feel like they have control and they have sovereignty over their data. Now, specifically with regards to tribal nations who don't who are concerned about having their data located somewhere else,
Yeah.
we have the ability to put essentially a mini cloud data center into a tribal data center. So they can run all the same cloud applications that they would run in the cloud, but
Yeah.
their data never leaves their premises. It's in their own data center. It doesn't actually leave. So that's one possibility. But beyond that, we have all the capabilities. If they do want to run it in our data center, in our cloud data center, we have all the capabilities, provide all the security, protection, so only they can see their data and other people can't see their data, even if it's being hosted somewhere else.
Wow, that's nice. And but okay, here's the issue though. Sometimes a lot of the tribal properties they operate on a lot of legacy systems, and they've been working like this for decades. But how do you advise a tribe on integrating, for example, AI, cloud, integrating innovation like sports betting or cashless gaming without disrupting the on-premises stuff? How do you kind of propose that? What would you say to that?
So you bring in a new innovation like cloud AI, and you've got all of these legacy on-premises systems, and you're worried about disruption. My general recommendation is not to do a big bang approach where you impact everything at once, but
Mm-hmm.
instead focus on one system at a time. So, for example, let's say we want to introduce AI.
Yeah.
Instead of adding AI to all your systems at once,
Yeah.
maybe take one system that you can segregate from the rest and add it to that one first. Get
Mm-hmm.
comfortable with how that system goes before you then add it to additional systems. So, for example, let's say that you're running a casino
Yeah.
and your casino has a website
Yeah.
where where customers come in, they get information about what's going on at the casino. Now, some
Right.
of these websites, if you look at a small casino website, might be nothing more than a brochure currently. But
Sure.
maybe you could add AI to put a chatbot on that website to answer commonly asked questions,
Questions. Right.
and so that the more sophisticated questions go to your human customer service reps, but the AI can answer the simple
The
questions.
basic ones.
And that's an example of only one system we're touching, just the website of public information.
Mm-hmm.
And we get the customer used to using AI and get an appreciation for what's necessary. And then from there, you can grow it. Maybe the next step is to apply AI to some of the internal systems for the customer's employees. Maybe the customers have a employee HR system that answers some questions. And again, you could have an AI chatbot that answers the simple questions, and the more difficult questions go to the human HR person to answer those. And
Wow.
again, get a little more exposure, grow the system, grow the comfort level of the employees with the
Yeah.
system, and
Yeah.
eventually you migrate AI out into more and more sophisticated use cases.
I love that. Start small, uh, get buy-in, then grow. Right.
Yeah,
That sounds like a really good strategy. I think. Um,
exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about something that is kind of, I think, is Buck Rogers. I don't even know if people know what Buck Rogers is, but very innovative. Is talk about quantum computing because that's kind of a little bit of your background too. Quantum computing and travel, and especially in the casinos, the tribal casinos here. So you brought it up that one of your first random number generators you created on the Apple IIe back in the day when you're in eighth grade. And now most casino games today rely on the pseudo random number generators, which are mathematically predictable to a powerful enough computer. How could quantum random number generators fundamentally change the trust factor for tribal gaming? And is this something operators, especially on the tribes, should be planning on today?
So, all right, so let's back up a step.
Yeah, yeah. I said a lot there, buddy. I said
Yeah.
a lot.
All right. So let's talk about random number generator, pseudo random. We call it a pseudo random number generator because it's very, very hard to generate a true random number using computer software.
Right.
And so we call it pseudo random because it's appears
Pseudo-random.
random even though it's not truly random.
Right.
Um, well, because it's not truly random, it is possible to create algorithms that could predict it.
Hmm.
And as we go closer to true quantum computers, some of those algorithms that we're currently using to generate pseudo random numbers are going to be vulnerable to quantum computers actually predicting what the next number is.
Right.
Even if our current PC can't predict it, a quantum computer likely will be able to.
Yeah, within the
Um,
next 2 to 3 years. Maybe not right now, but 2 to 3 years, correct?
It depends on the algorithm. Some of
Got
our
it.
pseudo random number algorithms we have right now might be good
Yeah.
for 20 or 50 years.
Oh,
Some of
okay.
them might go in the next 10 years.
Got it.
It depends on the algorithm.
Got it.
Um, and because a lot of this stuff is theory because the quantum computers are still growing.
Yep.
And so we really have to see how the quantum computers grow over the next few years to see how practical it will be to actually break these algorithms.
Mm.
But that being said, there's two approaches to dealing with the problem of quantum computers or the threat to quantum computers the threat that quantum computers propose to our current pseudo random number generators and encryption algorithms in general.
Yeah.
Um, the first theory is just to kind of try and find those algorithms that aren't currently vulnerable, the ones that are like
Mm.
50 years away as opposed to
Right.
5 or 10 years away.
Right.
Um, the other theory is to actually leverage quantum computers themselves to come up with a new paradigm of random number generators that, again, the ability to break that should be even further away than 50 years.
Mm.
So those are the two approaches. Um, I think for now, because quantum computers are still early stage,
So
it's
early.
be- it's
Yeah.
better to focus on the first approach, which
Yeah.
is not relying on the quantum computers themselves. Since again, but the second stage might be our long-term solution. Whereas once we truly have practical quantum computers, we'll have algorithms that are capable of making numbers even more random than we can today.
And by the way, too, when we bring up random number generators, nobody gets super excited. They're like, whoa, what a boring topic, right? But it is actually so key because a lot of cyber criminals are focusing in on tribal casinos. They feel like those are somewhat the new bank robberies. They're trying to target those because, they somewhat think that they could be broken into faster. And also for some of the other casinos that I've worked with personally that have been based in other countries such as Asia. I know that there's a casino right now in a small city-state country. Won't say the name, but basically they have a quantum computer that is creating a random number generator that has become the heartbeat of the entire organization, from the roulette tables to the slot machines. It gets all of its numbers there. That means that nobody can just walk into their casino, figure out that there's a pattern, play the games, win the games, and I'm saying that in quotes because they're not really winning. They just know the random generator, and then they walk out with a bunch of money. Even the staff cannot even figure out what the random numbers are to be able to steal from, or be able to have family and friends or someone to come in and steal. So that heartbeat part is going to really come in really become I think, a really big part of, I guess, the difference between protecting your casino and as opposed to having people come in to break into it and steal a little bit from that, but when we said that, I actually there was there was a question I skipped, and I feel like this is a great time to bring into that. One of those questions is why all these big casinos that are in Vegas, they have massive R&D budgets. We just talked about quantum and the tropical casinos. Some of the tropical casinos are still working on other just AI, bringing AI into it. And we're like, oh, let's do quantum. But with these big ones that are in Vegas, they have massive R&D budgets. But and travel casinos often face more complex regulatory geographical challenges. But is quantum or another technology the equalizer, you believe, that gives tribal operators a competitive edge over their commercial competitors in Vegas and some of the bigger cities?
There is still so much developing so fast in quantum.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say that it is an edge for tribal operators, but it could be. Where I see it going is I see it as an acceleration of leveling the playing field for those who are early adopters. So those who are early adopters in the quantum and AI and blockchain will have an advantage over those who are lagging adopters. And I do think that the small organizations typically can move faster than a big organization if they want to leap out there. Sure. Now, some small organizations prefer not to take any risk at all, and that's fine. But that's their decision to not take any risk. But I think those small organizations that dive in and take risk may achieve outsized rewards.
Wow. With all this being said, we have to recruit. We have to find the people that actually support these technologies, especially for these tribal casinos. I know you've taught computer science at Virginia Tech. What role do you think like tribal colleges and universities can play in co-designing like curriculums with tech giants such as Oracle to ensure like native students are learning AI and quantum skills or any other data science or programming skills that are immediately usable for their own nation's enterprise? Like, how would you kind of propose that?
You raise a really good point. And I've seen the issues with STEM education from a number of different perspectives, both from teaching at Virginia Tech, like you mentioned, as well as, participating from an Oracle side, interacting with, organizations and universities and the tribes. And I even attended a STEM event at the Obama White House a few years ago.
Wow.
So my perspective is that individuals learn differently. Some people learn by seeing, some people learn by doing, some people learn by listening, some people learn by, attending conferences or watching interviews like this one. People learn differently. And so I think what you have to do, because people learn differently, is you have to try lots of different techniques and hope that you meet your core audience and you teach your core audience by trying all these different techniques. So I think they should continue everything they're doing, but also do more, invite in people from tech organizations like Oracle or Qualex or other organizations. Have technical events at your local library during a lunch hour or an evening, meetups, Eventbrite, that sort of thing. Do all sorts of different activities. And that way you have a chance of hopefully reaching everyone. Because one of the interesting things you discover is that it's not just one person who can handle a computer. Everyone can handle a computer. Everyone can handle a cell phone that's a computer and a phone.
Digital natives. A lot of the kids have just grown up with being digitally native, right?
Yeah, and today we have more training and education available than we've ever had before. There's so much available online, both paid stuff and free stuff, so much curriculum availability, the ability to communicate around the world. So there's really, the stars are the limit. We can reach out and we can find the information we need.
Yeah, this is my last one about this, but I think this is kind of key here is, a lot of the tribal nations have to import technical expertise from outside. One of the things that I think that you brought up before is like partners like Oracle, turning a reservation into an incubator for homegrown talent, be able to create kind of a startup community. I think you said that before, like Eventbrite.
Mhm.
Um, so that way they're not just a consumer of external tech, but they're actually creating things. Are there other things that you've kind of started up while you've been working at Oracle or outside of Oracle that you've been able to kind of create an incubator on a tribal nation or on a university campus to get the kind of the brain moving and get them excited about the next technologies?
Well, one of my favorite approaches for getting young people involved with new technologies is something called a hackathon. In a
Mm,
hackathon, you get a group of people together. They split up into teams, maybe three, four, five people on a team. And over a couple hours, maybe a weekend, they put together some kind of solution.
mm,
Typically, it's a minimal hello world version of using some new technology to do something, and then they create a little presentation. You post a presentation on YouTube showing what they did, explaining why it's useful, and so forth. And they pitch it to venture capitalists, faculty professors, authors, writers, and those people will read it and comment on it. And a lot of times a new company comes out of a hackathon. And that new company has been like, um, it's launched because a lot of people saw the idea and
yeah.
people started providing funding, and then it became a viable small business.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? I did this in Hong Kong one time. We had three teams win this hackathon presentation. They were showing how they could disrupt the insurance industry. And one of the teams who won, actually, they were in university at the time. They quit the very next day at the university. I don't recommend this. They quit the
Mhm.
university, got a bunch of funding, and they spun off a startup within a week from based on that hackathon. They won, but they didn't want they actually turned into a company
Yeah.
right before my eyes. That was really, really fascinating in what they were doing. Well, I know we're kind of getting close to the end here, but I wanted to say, we've talked about a lot of stuff, AI, quantum, how to kind of incubate talent. What would be kind of your party message as an external person coming in to help tribal casinos, something they should be aware of, kind of sage advice from you, what they could do to kind of get ahead of their Vegas counterparts or other casino counterparts.
So I would recommend to every tribal casino, whether they're really tiny or really large, that they should seriously get engaged with AI. I think AI has tremendous productivity advantages for your employees to enable your employees to become more effective in serving the customers. Because really, at the end of the day, why do customers come back to a casino or another hospitality uh, location? They come back because they prefer the service there.
Mm,
And AI has the ability to really enhance your employees' ability to deliver on premium service
mm.
and or service for all the customers. So I highly recommend leveraging AI
In some
in your
capacity.
operations.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's great. Tom, I can't thank you enough. I'm looking forward to speaking alongside you in San Diego and being able to go to the conference with you, and looking forward to a long relationship partnership with Oracle.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Wow, we went long. But what an incredible session today on Qualex Live. We've covered the full spectrum of what it means to kind of lead in the modern age, from human missions to digital infrastructure that makes it possible. Thanks to Valerie Red Horse Mole, we learned that true sovereignty is built on the foundation of international and intentional investment and social impact. And thanks to Tom Plunkett, he stripped away the AI hype to show us what the right partners like Oracle and tribes together they can harness massive computing power while keeping absolute jurisdiction over their data. Well, I'm Gary Jackson. This was Qualex Live, and the future starts now.